So my favorite way of investing is to take just a tiny bit of money and make it worth more than what we've started with. But the problem is that's just not quite enough money yet. So let's make it worth a lot more by taking it and making it worth a lot more. And that's my favorite way of investing. But my second favorite way is with ETFs, which is what this video is all about. Let's begin. Hi, my name is Andrei, jikh. Welcome back. Hope you had a great week. And let's get right into the top 10 ETFs, or exchange traded funds, which think of them like this simple deck of cards, which let's say is worth $20. Now your $20 will be spread out amongst all of these different stocks right here contained inside of this one fund. Now some of these companies or stocks will be worth more than others, but the point of trying to do this is to achieve full diversification, which is just a fancy way of saying that even though you might have a favorite playing card, you still need the entire deck of cards to be able to play that game of investing effectively. Now, if that analogy made zero sense, all I'm trying to say is that I'm really good with a deck of cards, but also never to have all of your money into one playing card, because if you lose that playing card, you lose all your money, and that's never stonks. Now, as of right now, there are more than 2,000 ETFs to pick from, which means it is very difficult to decide which of the ETFs are best to buy right now. So I want to share with you my top 10 favorite ETFs. This is by no means the be-all, end-all guide of the best ETFs. This is just what one random guy on the internet's opinion is. And remember, I play with playing cards, so keep all that in mind. Now, the first 5 I'm going to share with you are going to be growth-oriented, and the other 5 are going to be cash flow or dividend-oriented, which means I don't actually have to sell those ETFs in order to make money because they pay me either monthly or quarterly. Now, there are pros and cons to both of them, but hopefully this guide will at least point you in the right direction so you can decide which of these ETFs works best for you. And remember, you could pick more than just one ETF. You could pick 2, 3, 4, 5, as many as you want. So having said all that, let's dive right into the top 5 growth ETFs. And coming in at number 1 is VT. Let me ask you something. How many stocks do you want to own? Yes, by owning one VT stock, you own the entire world. You own the US market, you own the international market. You're basically a James Bond villain at this point. But if you believe that the world will be in a better place 20 to 30 years from now, you're gonna do good, and you might want to consider this ETF. Now, because it is so diversified, it's only returned around 5.7% since the fund was created, in comparison to US markets, which has returned around 7%. But Vanguard thinks that in the next 10 years, international markets are going to do better than US markets. But Warren Buffett, who's the smartest investor in the world, disagrees. But regardless of which is true, one thing is true, and that's that no one has a clue. Pro tip, by the way, you can own something like VT, but at a slightly cheaper expense ratio by owning a combination of around 55% VTI and 45% VXUS. And doing this, you'll save yourself a tiny bit of money, especially if you have buku bucks where 0.01% will make some difference. It's just another way of doing it. And at number 2 is QQQ. Now, this is a very popular investment option, and I want to cover it. In the early 1900s, things like steel, material, and heavy industry was the sector to invest in. We were building railroads, bridges, roads, infrastructure, so that sector boomed. But nowadays, it's just a stable dividend sector with nothing to brag about. Today, of course, the hot sector is technology, and we've got companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Tesla, MySpace. Just checking to see if you're still awake. Smash the like button if MySpace Tom was your only friend. But by owning QQQ, you're gonna own more than 100 companies from the NASDAQ that is very heavily weighed in technology. And because we are entering the age of technology, 20 to 30 years from now, we could look back at this moment in history and think, wow, 2020 was just the beginning of technology and we thought it was overpriced. Or 30 years from now, we could look back and think, 2020 was way overvaluing technology and the best products were already created. But generally speaking, sector dominance is usually temporary or cyclical. And I know it's very tempting to look at that graph and just assume it's going to keep on growing like that for the next 10 years. And maybe it will, because with great power comes great responsibility, Peter, which means if you want those big returns, you have to take the bigger risk. So if you're younger, this fund might be for you, but just remember, this fund's beta is at 1.13, which means it's a little bit more volatile than the general stock market, which also means you better like emotional roller coasters, because you just bought yourself a one-way ticket. And coming in at number 3 is ARK Fund, or ARKK. Now this one is an actively managed fund versus a passively managed one. An actively managed one means that there is a real human being who's working day and night to find these stocks. And for that reason, we have to pay a higher expense ratio of 0.75%, which means $75 for every $10,000 that we invest here, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually a lot of money when comparing it to a lot of other funds. But this one specifically is run by Cathie Wood, who looks at disruptive technologies to try to outperform the market. And she actually has, because one of the core holdings of ARK is Tesla, and it's performed incredibly well this year. Get this, in the last year alone, ARK has performed 65% gains, which is insane when comparing the overall stock market return, which has an average of 7% per year versus 65%. But its greatest strength is also one of its greatest weaknesses because it's actively managed. And there's very little evidence to show that humans can beat passively managed funds over many decades of time. There's just very little evidence to say that we as humans can pick better stocks than just following the market trends. So yes, this year it might be up 65%, but maybe next year technology doesn't do quite as well and it won't perform as well. But regardless, if you are an ultra aggressive investor for growth, then you might want to consider this stock. Coming in at number 4 is the VOO, which is Vanguard's S&P 500 ETF, which is a fancy way of saying that it tracks the top 500 companies in the whole United States. And you really can't go wrong with this one. It's a core holding in a lot of people's portfolios, and its closest siblings would be something like SDY or SPY or SPY, because I'm Russian. But actually, SPY, according to some studies, because it's got a cooler sounding ticker symbol, might actually help it perform better than other non-cooler sounding ticker symbols. It's weird. And lastly, number 5 is my personal favorite, and that is VTI. Every single working person in America, every single CEO with their fancy suits and ties is working every single day to make you more money. It's a really cool feeling because you can walk into any store in the US, pick up an item and say, I own this. But only theoretically, because if you try to run out with that item, you'll probably get arrested. But don't try to explain to the officer that you own 0.0000001% of that item because you own VTI. It won't go well. Trust me. Then my top 2 favorite growth ETFs, VTI and VOO, are both virtually the same, with VOO being just slightly better, but they both own the top 10 companies that are the exact same thing, but really they are interchangeable. And if you like big companies, then you should go with VOO. And if you want to own all the companies, then just go with VTI, but you'll not go wrong with either one of them. And you don't have to pick one or the other. You could just own both, and that's fine as well. But pro tip, if you buy something like VOO or VTI and you put in 80% of your money into that and the other 20% into VBTLX, which is a bond ETF to smooth the ride, as JL Collins says, then you can be set for the rest of your life. You can literally stop watching this video. But please don't, because you'll miss out on the cash flow and the passive income dividend ETFs, and I'll miss out on the ad revenue. But I love this fund so much that I put it all inside my M1 Finance Roth retirement account, and I did a video with that. You can watch it. Please use the link down below to help my wallet. You don't have to, but please do. Now let's talk about cash flow or dividend-oriented ETFs. Now these could pay either monthly or quarterly, because it's a 25-cent piece. It took me forever to do that move. And coming in at number 5 is Noble. Now, if dividend aristocrats could have their own ETF, then this is literally it, because the only companies inside of here are ones that have increased their dividend for 25 straight years or longer. That's pretty cool. Even though the dividend yield is only 2.2%, they've grown that dividend by about 12% in the last 5 years. The downside is you're going to trade a lot of growth for that stability. But not everybody cares about the yield, so you might want to consider adding this one to your portfolio, especially if you're older and you really value that stability and the pedigree and history of having companies pay you on time. Coming in at number 4 is SCHD, which is the Charles Schwab US Equity Dividend Fund. This one has a sweet spot yield of 3.44%. It's dirt cheap to own at just $6 for every 10K invested. It's grown in value over time, which is exactly what we want to see. And in the last 5 years, it's grown its dividend by 10%, which is great. In the last year alone, it's grown its dividend by 20%. It pays us quarterly, and it's just an all-around solid dividend ETF. And coming in at number 3 is VIG, which stands for very good. No, it doesn't. It stands for Vanguard's Dividend Appreciation Fund, and it accepts companies that have increased their dividends for 10 plus years. Now, its dividend yield is only at 1.81%, but what it lacks in yield, it makes up for in growth, because it's a grower, not a shower. But one way to substitute VIG is with DGRO, which is the exact same principle, except the companies in this ETF are ones that have increased their dividends by 5 plus years. But the two are almost identical. And coming in at number 2 is VYM, which is Vanguard's High Dividend Yield ETF. Right now its yield is at 3.5%, and since the fund was created, it has returned an average of around 6.7%, which is pretty in line with the stock market. It's got a really dirt cheap expense ratio of 0.06% as well, and by owning this one stock, you will own 428 different stocks, which means you will be extremely well diversified. There's not that many bad things I can say about it. It's an all-around amazing ETF, which I'd like to own more of. And at number 1 is SPHD. Now, I have around $6,700 invested into this one, and it's paying me around 5.5%, which is an extremely high yield, but it's got a pretty high expense ratio to boot. 0.3%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is actually a lot. The good thing though is that it pays me monthly, but it's not necessarily my number 1 favorite. I like a lot of these on this top 5 list for different reasons. Some of them have better growth and lower yield, and other ones have lower growth and higher yield. It's a balancing act, but whichever one you choose, you really can't go wrong with any of these. But before you quit this video thinking, cool, got my list, never seeing that guy's videos again, not so fast, because if you don't watch this next part, you're going to make this very common mistake. You're going to open up your brokerage account, you're going to look through all the other dividend ETFs that people are buying, and you're going to see one that's called SDIV, the Super Dividend ETF, which sounds like what my childhood dreams are made of. What up? No, but seriously, imagine a Super Saiyan ETF. At least I transformed into a Super Saiyan right away instead of screaming at you for half an hour before I did it. But anyway, you're gonna find SDIV and you're gonna see the monstrous 12% dividend yield. You're gonna see that it pays you monthly and that you could earn more money with $100,000 than I'm earning with $200,000. So why not then just put all of your money into SDIV?
Andrei was an idiot. I found something way better.
But there's a few reasons why you shouldn't do this. And reason number 1, it's got a pretty high expense ratio of 0.6%, which doesn't sound like a lot when you're making 12%, right? Not exactly, because when you have a dividend yield that high, that means it's probably investing in companies that are unstable and whose prices are falling lower and lower, because there's an inverse relationship between the dividend yield and the price. As the price gets lower, the dividend yield goes higher. And because of that, look at what the SDIV stock price has done since 2011. You see that? That's your money curling up into a fetal position like Voldemort at King's Cross. But if you invested $100,000 in 2011, sure, you would have made some money with your dividends. But after all that time, your $100,000 would be worth less than half of what it was when you originally invested. So it's almost like you're not really making money, you're just robbing it from one place and putting it somewhere else, but as you're running, the bills are just falling behind you, so you're actually not doing anything. And that's what's called a value trap, which is a mistake a lot of people will make because they didn't get to this point in the video. Remember that investing is a long-term game, and you're better off going with something more conservative today, something like a 2% dividend yield, because 20, 30 years from now, after holding that fund, you could increase your yield on cost to something like 4 or 5, 6% or even more. And we want that trifecta, right? We want that principal equity to grow in value, meaning the stock price itself is increasing. We want those dividend payouts, and we want those dividend payouts to increase over time. But better yet, you're probably better off going with just VTI, and you'll outperform most of the average dividend investors. Probably. Not a guarantee, but probably. Dividends give you a really good peace of mind, but if you like growth investing, then you really can't go wrong with the ETFs that I've provided. But whatever you do, before you invest, just make sure you do your own research, because you can always lose money, especially short term. Long term though, you'll probably end up making money because the stock market has been the best performing asset class in the entire world. But having said that, I'm sure I've missed a few of your favorite ETFs, and if I have, let me know in the comments below and I'll try to include them maybe in part 2. But in the meantime, if you've not already done so, sign up with Webull for free. You'll get a free stock, fund your account $100, get a second free stock valued up to $1,400 in value, get your third free stock from Robinhood. And I totally sound like a salesman now. But you can also join my free Discord, link below. Follow me on Instagram. I post from time to time. Love you, lovely people. I will see you back here on Monday and Friday. And before I go, I have a very important question for you, which is, which one is your favorite ETF? But more importantly, is a hippopotamus or a really cool hippopotamus? I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.